My name's Gene. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you all for being here tonight. A long time ago, I didn't feel very good about myself. A long time ago, I used to walk behind buildings so people would not see me, walk down alleys so people would not see me. I did not feel very good about myself a long time ago. And one of the things I did to change that was I drank alcohol, and alcohol worked for me. And I didn't have to walk down alleys anymore. Alcohol was a miracle in my life. If it had not been a miracle in my life, I would not be here tonight. Alcohol worked for me, or I would not be here tonight. And it worked for me for 25 years. And a good part of that part of my life, it worked very effectively. And I had grown up here, in Fort Worth. I was born here in 1941, St. Joseph's Hospital. And we lived in Polytechnic Heights. And my father was a roofer. My mother was a waitress, not much educated. And we were not a wealthy family. But my father was an alcoholic, and he drank. And I can recall meeting people early on. And it would influence my relationships from then on, even up till today, that my father was an alcoholic. I can recall in the third grade, looking back, this young man came in the first week of school. It's about 1949, and he had a strange, bizarre look about him, a crazed look in his eye. His hair was disheveled, his shoes were all beat up, his clothes were worn, and he had this crazed look in his eyes. And I took all this in, and I knew that he and I were going to be good friends. I knew it. That he had that intimate way, intuitive way of pronouncing that my father is an alcoholic without even saying it. And when I went to his house, his father usually wasn't there, and if he was there, he was drunk. Likewise, when he came to my home. And that's the way it was in my relationships. My father had occasion when I was about 9 years old to fall off of a roof, being a roofer, and he broke his back. And my mother, not being much educated, was unable to support us. She tried to hold down 2 jobs as a waitress. But we had to go to a place in East Dallas called Buckner Orphans Home. I had a twin sister, a younger brother. I had never had any kind of experience in this kind of institutional process. And I got there on Christmas Day of 1954. It was our first day on the campus of Buckner Orphans Home. And a lady named Sally Polk welcomed us to this place called the Receiving Home. And we were taken in, they checked our hair for lice. And we were assigned to these rooms for 10 days to be there before we went to the main campus. And I was very much into fear. And this young man named Eddie Welch was assigned to take care of the receiving home at that time. And I was trying to hide my fears with this kind of nonstop grandiosity. And at some point he said to me, "You're the kind of person, when they get you over to the main campus, they're just going to beat the crap out of you." And that got my attention. About 3 or 4 more days to go before I hit the main campus when he told me that. So I got down and started doing a lot of push-ups, chinning myself up on a swing in the back of this yard, preparing for this confrontation. And I got to the main campus 4 days later, and people would ask, "How did you come to be here?" And I had given this some thought. It's about Christmas of 1954. And I had this great fear of being beaten up. And these guys looked a lot older than me. They were a lot bigger. They had more aggressive eyes. I had never seen people like this before in my life. It was all new to me. And I can recall thinking about this. And then finally I responded to that question by saying something like this. I said, my parents had promised me a certain kind of present for this Christmas. And they had breached that promise and failed to deliver it in a timely and reasonable manner. And as a result of that, as a consequence of that failure, one evening about 3 a.m., I went out to the garage and I got some lawnmower gas. And I went into the house and into their bedroom and I poured the gas on their bed and I set them on fire. And that's why I'm here today. And these people were very quiet. In the 2 years I lived at Buckner, no one beat the crap out of me. We did not know much about intimacy at our home, but we did know how to survive. And I learned how to survive. And to lie was one of the ways I survived. And I thought long and hard before I lied to make sure there was a lot of detail to it. And it sounded pretty good. A lot of detail, a lot of credibility. I think, well, he must not be lying. And I knew that, being that family. We were not an intimate group. Our family was not. We loved things. We loved cats. We loved dogs. We loved pets. We loved old songs. And we could cry about things like that. But we couldn't be intimate with each other. I can recall later on being married in adult life, many years later. My wife was a German girl, and she was from Brenham, Texas. And we were there for a Thanksgiving or a Christmas. And the refrigerator started going out, making a sound, which indicated there was something wrong. And that family, her brothers, her father, they got the toolbox out. They went down to the hardware store and wherever else they had to go. And within an hour or two, that refrigerator was functioning again, just like it was new. Well, I can remember a similar experience when I was about 9 years old, this summer. And our refrigerator started going out. And my father began to talk about where we'd bought that refrigerator at Montgomery Ward's down here on 7th Street, and how long we'd had it, and how well it had served us. And he got kind of emotional when he talked about it. And it was like it was connected to a life support system in that refrigerator, making a strange dying sound. And only he had the responsibility, and we knew that, to disconnect and make the judgment of when that life support system would be terminated. And that refrigerator reached the point where you could take stuff, and then it no longer would cool in the bottom of that refrigerator. You had to put the stuff up in the freezer, and it would keep it cool. And finally, one night, he made the decision to disconnect that life support system, and it died. And he left that refrigerator, he took it and put it in the backyard, and let it lie in state for 2 or 3 days. And kept talking about it. And he would not buy a refrigerator. He had to buy, we brought ice home in little igloos for a while. And he talked about that refrigerator. Well, we loved cats, we loved dogs, we loved alcohol, but we couldn't love each other very effectively. And that's the way it would be for us. When I came back from Buckner, it was about 1955, and I was about 14 or 15 years old. I stayed with different aunts and uncles who were alcoholic and liked it. I liked that situation because there was no accountability. I could kind of come and go as I liked, and I enjoyed that process. There came a time when I found a fellow who was about 2 years older than me, and his name was Clarence. And I moved in with Clarence. And he had a job. He was self-employed, and he was very independent. And I liked this about him. He was into maintenance. And he would go around to these buildings at night, late at night, cleaning them out. Going in there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, loading up stuff and carrying stuff out of the building. The only problem was we did not have the consent to be in these buildings. There was quiet work. We weren't accountable to anybody. And we'd sell this stuff for a profit. And I was in some kind of denial about this, you see. It seemed right at the time. But we were having a party, it turned out, for one of our friends. He was about my age. Went to high school with him. And I had just begun to drink alcohol. I was about 16. We're down at Sycamore Park in East Fort Worth. And I knew how to get drunk and pass out. I had a handle on that. And that's pretty much what I'd done that evening. And the police had pulled up to terminate our party. And they pulled in these motorcycles right up to where we were having the party. And I got up to try to run. I just stumbled and staggered down this creek bed, Sycamore Creek. And finally the police, they caught up with me, this officer did. And he kind of tackled me. And my cousin was there and came back to help me. And he was kind of a pathological sort. And he took a rock and started hitting this officer in the side of the head while he was on top of me. And this officer bled on my T-shirt. And my cousin fled, and I was stumbling around there on East Rosedale Street. And the police pulled up and stopped me and saw I was drunk and had his blood all over me. And they found their comrade laying back there and realized that I was probably the one who did this, or thought that I did. And as a consequence, I was put on probation here in Tarrant County. And this was a long time ago. And they had a very informal process. And my probation officer was an assistant district attorney for Tarrant County, Texas. And I was required to come there a couple times a week, and finally one time a week. I hardly ever saw her because she was, quite frankly, she was having an affair with another, with a guy who was with the DA's office. And I did not know this, but she was married to an alcoholic, a practicing alcoholic. And he had a very bad temper, and she was afraid of him. Everybody was afraid of this guy. He was later shot to death here in Fort Worth. But this little assistant DA, when I was sitting in her office, would come up and harass me thinking that I'd been underpunished for what I had done. And he would admonish and 12-step me in his own way. And one day, her husband, I could hear him coming down the hallway, and he looked into her office and saw that it was vacant. It was about 3 o'clock on a Friday, and he got really angry. And he kind of turned like a turd on a tank top and focused on this little assistant DA who was giving it to me. And this guy realized had drawn this man's attention. He got kind of quiet, and this lawyer said to him, he says to him, "Why don't you pick on somebody your own size?" And then he began to kind of tremble, this lawyer did. And this little assistant DA started getting a little frightened, you know. And he says, "Why don't you step outside with me right now and we'll talk about this?" And this guy really got scared. And finally he kind of turned to me, he looked down at me and he said, "Just come with me. He's not going to do anything." And I went with him. And he took me to a little bar close to the courthouse, about 2 blocks away, where some lawyers were drinking alcohol. They'd been drinking all day long. And I recognized this process and felt comfortable there. And he introduced me as the guy who'd beat up the cop. And they all just kind of warmed to that, you know. Wow, yeah, great. You know, and I was proud of it too for the time being. And I walked home later that evening down the Texas Pacific Railroad in East Fort Worth. And I wanted to memorize everything that had happened. Wanted to remember every word that had been said by this man. Wanted to remember every nuance, every gesture, because it's the first time in my life that someone had stood up for me. And I wanted to remember this. Couldn't sleep that night, walked around the neighborhood thinking about this, you see. Was excited about this. And I got to thinking somehow, some way, this is what lawyers do. He's what a lawyer is. He is that. And I got this fanciful fantasy of sorts, thinking, if I could just be that way, I'd be okay. And I became obsessed with that notion of becoming an attorney. Went back to high school the following year, made pretty good grades, and then finally started making real good grades. And it did not change, those grades, making good grades, did not change my relationships or my attitudes. I dated a girl named Crazy Sally. Did not change my self-esteem so much. We all dated Crazy Sally. And sometimes we all dated her at the same time. So making good grades did not change the way I felt about myself. And that would be the way it would be. And I went on into law school down in Houston, University of Houston Law School. Started there in 1965. Met a little German girl, got married. Could not really afford to drink like I wanted to. Had a horrible wreck where I got these little scars. Almost killed some people, but was fortunate, did not. The only bad incident I had going through law school. When I came out of law school, I was obsessed with being successful. And I did not care so much about what was true or untrue. I had earlier in Fort Worth, had already developed a system for finding jobs that had nothing to do with truth. It had to do with survival. And what I would do would be call people up and pretend to be an employment agency, pretend to be Texas Employment Commission. I would never leave a phone number. I would call the employer and find out what positions they had open, and I'd call back later claiming I had several people to come down and apply for the job. People like Johnny Gonorrhea, Jimmy Syphilis, and Gene Edwards. Who do you want to see? I'd ask them. We prefer Mr. Edwards, they'd say. You know, he can be right there, I'd tell them. And I'd get jobs like that. And it was with that philosophy that I went into law practice. How much money can I make? How well can I lie? Pretty well. Made pretty good money as a result of that. But I did not feel good about this process. There were a lot of things going on around me, and I did not feel any of those things. A lot of activity, a lot of apparent success, and money going in the bank, nice cars, stuff like this, traveling here and there. But I could not feel any of this. I could kind of see it happening, but could not feel it, you see. I found a little place close to the courthouse where some lawyers were drinking, kind of like those lawyers in Fort Worth. You know, I liked what they said, and I liked how they said it, just like the guys in Fort Worth. There was an excitement about these guys, an energy about them, a compulsiveness that just excited me. And the name of this place was Little Paul's Cafe. And early on, these guys told me, said, what we are, we're liberal Democrats. I like the sound and the crank of that, you see. And I went home that night and told my wife, I became a liberal Democrat today. And I liked it because I needed identity. Gene Edwards, attorney at law, and liberal Democrat. I needed all that I could get. And they told me, said, hey, we drink here at Little Paul's Cafe. And little tables with little chairs that have little holes in them, and the vinyls a little bit torn. That's why we were liberal Democrats. Okay? The Republicans drink down at the Capitol Club at the Rice Hotel. We don't ever go up there. And that's a good rule, I thought. And I honored that rule. And we drank for important causes and reasons. And we drank not because we were alcoholic, but for important causes and reasons. We drank because of the Kennedy assassinations, the Martin Luther King assassination, the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandals. And we drank, of course, like everyone did, because of starving children. We did not care where they were starving, as long as there was reasonable evidence that they were starving. Had to have that. It couldn't just be a rumor. And that was my denial, and I locked into that hard and fast. I locked into that. And I was the upper middle class, liberal Democrat, intellectual attorney at law, with a mysterious, interesting, exciting personality who only drank for important causes and reasons. Keep it simple. But I was dedicated to that process. My wife did not understand my coming home at 10 o'clock. Did not understand why I drank. But we did at this little club. And over the years of going through this liberal Democrat process, I began to deteriorate in some areas. Brain cancer, stomach tumors, and things like this. Began to go blind. After about 6 or 7 years of this, I thought. Felt more comfortable at my office with the lights off. We hired eccentric personnel. You know. And our secretary, my secretary, would come in with a little ballpoint pen flashlight to take notes. And my whole support system was like that. My dentist would let me smoke while he was cleaning my teeth. And then, of course, we'd go have a few drinks. You know? And that's the way it was. And that's the way it was. My wife began to get disturbed about my drinking and my overall behavior. And had talked once or twice about leaving. I knew she was just kidding. But in October of 1981, she did leave me. She left me. And there was a note there. I came home drunk and found it. It says, Gene, I've moved off near the ranch somewhere. I need to think a while. Need to think about this. And I'll be in touch. I had no reaction to this at all. I just read the note and threw it away. Went and opened a beer. No problem at all. And I was dead drunk at the time. Well, this was the middle of October of 1981. Well, Thanksgiving came rolling around. I started getting worried about her. I guess I'm too sensitive. I just couldn't turn it over. So I called her parents and said, where's Susan at? I asked them. She said, well, they said, she's up near Mullen, Texas, not too far from our ranch. I said, okay. And then I got angry and thought, I'm going to take some action and go out and develop my own relationships. And did not have too much skill in that area because I just drank, you know. I didn't go to places to dance. And so I went to an adult bookstore and got some literature, which I thought would be helpful in this new process. And one book was called Swingers Clubs in Houston. And I looked into it, found one near our house, or thought it was near the house, and went out there around midnight on a Friday. And got there and nobody was there except a bunch of tired old people. Tired old drunks. And I just felt like this was a deceptive trade practice. You know? I was really upset about this. I had to have several drinks just like that. And I asked this guy, I said, hey, you know, here's your name in this book. He said, I don't know why it's in there. I didn't even know it was in there, he said. He said, but I tell you what you can do, he told me. He kind of leaned over the bar like he didn't want anybody else to hear this stuff. He said, you can go down to where Westheimer turns into Elgin, and you'll find some action. Just look along the street. And I did that. I took his counsel and went down there. And went for several blocks and saw nothing. And then it was like a miracle that God had put this woman in my life at this time. And she was standing under this street light. And she was so beautiful. She had platinum hair, and just so voluptuous and buxom, I couldn't believe it. I thought, I thought, well, I'll just play it cool and go by. I thought, no, I may miss this. I did a U-turn and came back to pick her up. And I thought, what am I going to say to her? I wonder if she likes this kind of music. I got kind of concerned. And I pulled up, and I didn't know what to say. She just got in the car. She says, I don't want any money, I just want Coke. And I started driving away. I thought, well, to myself, I was thinking, I don't have any Coke. And I got thinking, I do have some baking soda. And it was the best you could, Arm & Hammer. Popcorn and baking soda. And I also had some niacin and some Excedrin. And you do the best you can with what you have to work with. So I got her home, trying to be pretty cool about this process, and told her to go in the living room, make herself comfortable, just take off her clothes. And I went in the kitchen, I got this baking soda, I put it on these little board and started beating on it with this hammer. And the Excedrin and the niacin. And I tried some of it out myself. I thought, wow, that's got a pretty good kick, I thought. And I went into where Monica was in the living room, and I had this laid out, little rows. And she sampled some of it, and make a long story short, she said, this is not Coke, and it burns my nose, and she got very upset and began to slander my good name and accuse me of deceptive trade practices. And I don't know how you can feel when you get in this kind of insanity, but I felt the same way that counterfeiters do. I did the best that I could. It wasn't the real thing, but it was the best that I could do. And I began to look at her and realized I was entitled to some set-offs and credits against my own fraud. Because although she was a voluptuous princess from the waist down, from the neck down to the waist, from the waist down she was a prince. You see what I mean? If you're new in the program, we call this bottoming out. Bottoming out. Well, I sure told her how I felt about all this, you know. Well, I was in a very bad place, as we say. About 2 hours later, I went back out looking for her again. You know? In a bad place. I don't know. I decided after that I would quit going out. And we just drink at the house. And I did do that, and I had never done that before. And I had this little dog named Scooby. And really, this is about the only relationship that I had left. My little dog, Scooby. And she had always ate or drank anything that I ate or drank. And so I poured this scotch for myself, and she wanted some too. Yeah. And so I fixed her a small bowl, and I fixed myself a large bowl. And we proceeded to get pretty drunk. And it was around approaching Christmas of 1981. She got very sick, and I was afraid that I'd killed her. But she had recovered 2 or 3 days later. And about a week after that, I can recall sitting there drinking one evening. She came back up indicating that she apparently wanted to join with me on this process again. And this time I thought, well, I'll just give her some beer and put some ice in it. And she came up to this bowl and sniffed around and would not drink it. I fixed her some very watered-down scotch. She would not drink anything with this alcohol. And I looked back now and realized that what had happened was that after that really one bad drunk, she knew that she was powerless over alcohol and her life was unmanageable. After the one drunk. And she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. About a week later, I had an experience where I got real drunk. And I don't remember ever getting my hair cut back in these days. I can't remember a barber in Houston all the years I was there. I cut my own hair most of the time. I had very low standards. This evening when I cut it, I did a unusually bad job. I did not remember doing it, as a matter of fact. And then the next morning I got up and I found all this hair in the sink and saw these bald spots on my head. And tucked the hair out and put it on a sink and tried to dry it all out. Put it in long rows and medium rows and started trying to figure out how to get this hair back on my head. And I did not have much experience in doing anything except going to bars. And I didn't even know a place, Handy Dan's, I'd never even heard of. You know. And called down there, and I did not know, for example, they had something called super glue. It's new to me. And I got this, and it turned out to be a miracle substance because it did, I could put the hair back on my head, and it would stay there. And at night, it didn't look too bad. But over a period of the next few days, it just started coming off, you see. After about 3 or 4 days. I remember waking up that one morning, my dog Scooby was looking at me. She slept on the bed with me, and she's looking at me, and all this hair was down on my face and stuff. And she must have been thinking, there but for the grace of God go I. Jesus Christ. Anyway. About a week later, I had become a very liberal Democrat. So liberal that I quit going to court when I was supposed to. And this judge, who happened to be in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, noticed, probably over the last several years, that I was a little bit unusual in my habits, knew that I probably had a drinking problem. And he arranged to have some people come to my house and consult with me and confront me. And I had just a very slightly open mind about this because I was convinced that my problem, I had a brain tumor, stomach cancer, Berger's disease, hypoglycemia, miscellaneous neurological disorders. And what are they going to do? And what's AA going to do about that? But I went to a meeting there in Houston and stood outside the St. John's Episcopal Church, and the group was called River Oaks Group. And it was a very nice group, and people there were very well dressed, very well groomed, very well spoken. And I stood outside with this fellow attorney and looked inside this meeting room and watched these people, and they looked nice. And after the meeting was over, I walked into the room and held hands with these people, and while they said the Lord's Prayer. And when this happened, I had this experience of knowing, I like this. I like this. It was just that simple. I enjoy this experience, I was thinking. And I had some feelings that scared me because I had reached the point where I thought all feelings were stroke symptoms. You know? I thought, wow, I wonder if I can be able to handle this. And I did. And the next night I picked up a Desire Jip at a group called the Zoo Group over by the Herman Park area. And I became obsessed with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous almost immediately. The Post Oak group had a 6 a.m. meeting, had a 12 noon meeting, a 6 p.m. meeting, an 8 p.m. meeting. I went to all 4 of those. And I closed down my law office. And I became obsessed with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous almost immediately. I knew and hung around enough to know who paid for the coffee and who did not. You know, I kept up with such things. I thought it important at the time because I knew who was AA-ish and who was not. And I loved to tell everybody my story. And I would tell them my story till they get up and leave. And I'd follow them wherever they were going and just keep on telling them my story. But I stayed sober. And I really enjoyed the first few months. The physical feel of sobriety. I enjoyed waking up in the morning just rubbing my feet together. I liked the way that felt. I had 2 old bikes out in the garage that we'd bought from Western Auto, put both of them together, made one good bike, and began to ride it around. I was amazed I could ride without having a heart attack or a stroke. Went 2 miles the first day. Just thought, well, this is some kind of Olympic process. But got to ride to that 6 a.m. meeting in the morning, and the other fellas jogged, and we rode. We eventually went on whitewater canoe trips together. And I liked this. I had never had this kind of experience. I'd been drunk for 25 years. I did not pay much attention to steps at first. I enjoyed the people of AA. I enjoyed that part of it very much. Early on, I was hoping my wife would come back to me, and I had felt somewhat disappointed and maybe even a little bit betrayed by the program when she announced that she wanted a divorce after I'd been sober for a while. And I was very disillusioned for the time being and felt that somehow the program had kind of let me down a little bit. And we met in the court one morning and we got the divorce. I was about 6 months sober, and someone kept telling me to do the 4th step, and I wrote out a 4th step and looked at it, and I thought, this sounds pretty AA-ish. This looks pretty AA-ish. And I sure it was someone who, and it sounded pretty AA-ish when I said it, but it was just all BS. And it really wasn't anything that I felt. But I thought, well, if I can just kind of get through these steps like the wide world of sports, I'd get somewhere. And I did do that. When I was about 10 months sober, I was planning on leaving Houston, moving to the ranch, and teaching there, and not practicing law anymore. And it was December 1982, I was 10 months sober. And these 2 fellows approached me, and they said, hey, we don't think this group here, Post Oak Group's AA-ish enough for us. We're going to start a real AA group. I said, okay. I don't have anything better to do. And so we had a meeting, and these 2 guys who suggested at that first meeting They got angry because somebody said, hey, let's have an Al-Anon meeting there. No. That Post Oak was alcoholics only, you see. Very conservative. And I'd been going, I said, I even went to ACA, I told them. Well, these two guys got angry and walked out. And the only one left in the room was me. I was 10 months sober, and this other guy was 6 months sober, and the two of us were going to start this AA club. And we voted between ourselves, and here's what we agreed upon doing. We were not going to start out in the basement of a church and work out. I was going to be there for a short period of time. I had to start out with something more ambitious. We were going to start a major AA club from scratch. And I found some office space, and we had access to a jacuzzi, a swimming pool, a workout room. No other AA club had this. You know what I mean? 6 months free rent, then we start paying $2,000 a month. It was going to be a wonderful thing. And we opened it up and had a tremendous opening weekend. It was the middle of March of 1983. And I was 13 months sober. And I never forget the excitement surrounding that first 2 days. And then on Monday came around, nobody was there. Everybody had gone back to their home groups. And I thought, well, time went on by, and of course these months began to roll by, and I had guaranteed the lease for 5 years. Began to kind of count, what is 48 months times 2,000? Whatever that came out to. Began to get nervous about that. And we went to these treatment centers, and I didn't know much about 12-stepping. I knew a lot about zero-stepping. But we went to these treatment centers and said, hey, we went to the management people and told them, we have just opened a club, and you put this in your brochure, that you have access to a jacuzzi, a swimming pool, and so on and so forth. It looked great, Of course, if you know how treatment centers are, they just jumped right into that. And we would come and pick the people up, and the deal was that we'd take them to our group and other groups. Well, there's nobody at our group, so they like the other groups better. Then we'd go back later, after that experience, and say, the other groups suck. Come to our group. This isn't very spiritual, but we were trying to survive. This was a learning process for us. Well, I got sued for non-payment of rent. And the day I got served with those papers was August of 1985. I thought, boy, AA has really let me down this time. Here I am starting an AA group in Houston, a major group no less. And I get sued. I got served with papers here at my law office. And I called up the group there in Houston and said, I got served with these papers, what's going on? I said, well, we're doing the best we can, they said. We've been trying to pay this lease payment. And I didn't want to go down there. I was so angry. So I talked to the attorney on the other side, and we went back and forth, and I had to get an injunction to keep from locking doors and changing locks and all this kind of stuff. And finally we agreed to meet at this AA group. It was going to be January of 85. And I went down there, and I knew they'd taken the jacuzzi away from us, they'd taken the workout room away from us, they'd taken all this stuff away from us because we weren't paying rent. I thought there would be nobody there except me and a couple of real strange people who are obsessed with this deal. And I got down there to the group, and it was standing room only. Standing room only at the Delta Club, and we had a big meeting room. And I couldn't understand what was going on. And there was this sense of unity, and there was this sense of fellowship, and this sense of participation, this sense of belonging to the Delta Club and dealing with this adversity. And what it was that the jacuzzi and the swimming pool had been disruptive and had kept our group from becoming a group. And the lawsuit made our group a group. The lawsuit made the Delta Club a success. And that's what I kind of learned in sobriety over the years, is that I have stumbled upwards just like the Delta Club stumbled upwards. By staying sober, taking a swing at these steps, I have stumbled upwards, I did not know or have much experience with the process of the steps, but when I was at the ranch staying there, and at the same time being worried about the Delta Club, I began to write. I began to do a lot of writing while I was up there, and to express my feelings. And I did not have the capability of talking about my mother or my father. When I did that, it would just disturb me, and I would feel a great sense of guilt and betrayal to my parents. And what I would do instead, and what I continue to do, is to depersonalize these issues. And I'd write hypothetically stories about Deanie from Abilene, Billy Bob W., Dr. Bernstein, people who never existed, whose feelings cannot be hurt. And I thought that to be consistent with our concept of anonymity, of putting principles before personalities. Really did. For example, when I was thinking about humility and false pride, which was a tremendous problem for me, the big ego, I wrote about Dr. Bernstein when I was talking about humility. And what I wrote was this, that it turns out, and this is purely hypothetical and fictitious, that there's a Dr. Bernstein here in Fort Worth who works at Harris County Hospital, and he could pass for my identical twin. You see. And I happened to be down at Harris Hospital visiting someone in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then coming down the elevator, the doors open in the main lobby. And this hysterical little nurse says, Dr. Bernstein, we've been looking for you everywhere. Thank God we found you. There's an emergency downstairs. You're the only one who knows this procedure. And it's brain surgery, you know. And I know I should say, I'm sorry you made a mistake. I'm Gene. I'm an alcoholic. I'm not Dr. Bernstein. But then I get to thinking, not saying that, but thinking, I've had 8 hours of biology. I've cleaned a few deer. I'm not going to charge for this. I probably know more about surgery than anybody else on the elevator. And I don't want this nurse to look bad. And the reality is, the unmanageability is that a few hours later, the real Dr. Bernstein's having explained to friends and family deceased what went wrong. I'm gone. Well, that's about false pride. Resentments were a problem for me. I was obsessed with that. I was addicted to that. I grew up in a very angry family, and every morning I got up, I'd think about something to be angry about. I'd scan like your radio does when you hit those seek buttons or scan buttons. Back to the year I was born, looking for frequencies of things that happened. Something my third grade teacher said to me, whatever. If that didn't work, I'd go forward in the future and make up something that hadn't happened, but if it did happen, I'd really be pissed. And so it was I wrote about this particular experience. And it so happens I'm 80 years old. I've retired to Goldthwaite, my ranch. Some very young and ambitious workers for the Internal Revenue Service are at in that area, just randomly looking through tax codes for property they can seize, you see. And they're looking for people that are old and decrepit so they can go out there and just take their property away. They come and say, here's this old man named Edwards out here off of Bulls Creek Road. Lives by himself. His nearest neighbor's 5 miles away. Let's go out there, you see. And they're on the road, Bulls Creek Road, laughing and they're ha ha ha. So eager to get my land. Unknown to them is I've been in town doing some shopping that I do once every 6 months. And I'm coming back down in this old 49 Chevrolet that hasn't had a license on it in years. And this dog in the back named Scooby, who has rabies. And in their excitement to get me, they go around the corner too fast and put into a bar ditch and it breaks their axle. You see? And I see them in the side. It's the middle of August. They're about to die. They've been there for 3 hours, and they're just waving hysterically as I come by, and they say, God, would you help us? And I recognize the side of the car that says Internal Revenue Service, and I know they're revenuers. I say, get in the back of the truck with this dog, you see. And there's nothing wrong with that. Get in the back of that dog, I tell them. And they get in the back of that dog, and we drive onto the ranch. And 5 years later, Deanie from Abilene comes to visit me. And he says, Gene, I couldn't help but notice those two fellows you have chained together out there in your field, working your field. Who are those guys? I say, Deanie, those are two revenuers I caught snooping around on Bulls Creek Road, and that's where they'll stay till the day they die. You see? Well, this is the kind of thing I used to like to think about on the way to work. And if you're behind me, my car might weave a little bit while I'm thinking about this kind of stuff. Well, those are what resentments do for me. There's a stimulation. There's a stimulation, and I'm addicted to that process. So I have to realize today that that's an addiction, and for me to be resentful to my wife, it's just that addiction. And I have to realize it's those revenuers. And for me to be angry at anybody, it's better for me to be angry at Billy Bob W. or Deanie from Abilene, or these revenuers that don't exist, as opposed to abusing people who really do exist, people who have real feelings. And today I try to be sensitive to that. The people I work with, I've worked at this office here in Fort Worth for 7 years. Not a loud word has been said. We have not had one argument. We've had attorneys come to our firm. We've never had one leave. All the attorneys on our floor, 8 of us, we're all in the program Alcoholics Anonymous. We all go to meetings. Some of the meetings we go together. And that's the miracle of this program. It's also the reality of knowing what resentments are for me and how this program has given me some tools to work with that process. I don't pretend to be an expert on the steps, But I do say in making amends, for example, one thing I've made a judgment about is it's not a good idea to make amends with the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Fort Worth Police Department. Nor is it a good idea to do the fifth step with any of these people. That much I know about the steps. I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous thinking that I was just a natural for 12-stepping people because I'd done so much zero-stepping. And zero-stepping means when you were still drinking alcohol and you were trying to help other people quit drinking or talk to them about their problem while I was still drinking. And this zero-stepping included telling people, if you get arrested, don't take the intoxilizer test. Make sure all your parking lights are working. Make sure all your brake lights are working. Make sure your inspection sticker is up to snuff. Drink closer to home. Don't have so much driving exposure. And this was zero-stepping. And I learned a lot of things, and I can remember back when I drank, sharing with younger people who were just becoming alcoholics the way to do it and the way not to do it. I can remember telling someone one time, he told me, he came in the bar, it was August, and he was bumping into these chairs, and I noticed, I said, if you'll just do this, on the way here, if you just keep one eye shut, and then when you come in the door, open the eye you've had shut and you'll be able to see. I can remember the glow of awareness and appreciation when I shared this with him. Another time was that if you had this kind of experience at a bar at 2 a.m. and there's kind of argument about universal standard time, and I've always had these real fancy watches because astronomy is my hobby, and they're right on the time, you see. And I didn't like these kind of bars that said, last call, and I knew better, you know. I knew this was a fraud. And when that drink was gone, when I came back from the bathroom, and there were 7 minutes till 2, and their watch said 5 after, I'd get angry. And on the way out, I'd drink other people's drinks. And one of the secrets that you learn is that when you drink out of long neck bottles, some people put their cigarettes out in those. Keep your teeth close together. It's like a filter. Well, because of this zero-stepping background, I thought I was a natural for 12-stepping, you know. Really did. And I did not like the idea when I took someone and told them, someone new in the program, and told them my story and made my confession to them about my drinking and how bad I was. And then took them out to dinner and almost cried as I continued to talk until they almost were crazy. And then would let them out and knew that they'd been healed by me. And then 4 or 5 days later, they'd come back and pick up a new desire chip. I did not want them to reestablish. I wanted them to die. Yeah? Because it was a personal failure. Yeah? So I did not have a spiritual understanding of this program for a long time. I really did not, you see. 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine named Thomas Drake, who was an attorney in Arlington, committed suicide, and he was in the program. And I was very disturbed about that because we were good friends. We'd hunted together, we'd canoed together. Then one day, Tuesday, a couple of weeks ago, his secretary called and said, I've got very terrible news. Mr. Drake is dead. And I found out shortly thereafter that he had shot himself in the head. He did not, and knew generally that in the last year or so he had been drinking. He'd become very depressed. He began to talk about suicide. And finally he did it. And he's the third person in the program, Alcoholics Anonymous, I know who has committed suicide. And he's had in common with all three of those people that he was drinking at the time it occurred. He'd also talked about committing suicide. He'd taken steps. He played around with his last will and testament, called his insurance agents, told his wife that he was going to do it. And then got drunk, became very depressed, and then did do it. And I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and it was a very disquieting experience for me. I had a lot of different feelings, and today I'm left with a feeling of disappointment. I do believe that 500 years from now, I have been dead a long time. And 500 years from now, we will all have been dead a long time. But not until then. Because what we do here, we pass it on. And that's my concept of Alcoholics Anonymous. I make a contribution of passing it on, like people passed it on to me. And that passing it on will go on for a long time after I'm gone. But if I commit suicide like Thomas Drake did, 500 years from now, I would have been dead a long time. 5 years from now, I would have been dead a long time. I would have terminated the legacy of sobriety and will not be passing it on. He leaves a poor legacy for his children by having committed suicide. That's not the message in the program. That's not doing the next right thing. Practice these principles in all my affairs. I used to have a lot of affairs, but very few principles. And today, I really do try to maintain and honor my commitments. And I've been in the same office for 7 years, 8 years. Try to show up in court on time. Keep gas in my car. I really want things to be okay, and that's a miracle. I really do want things to be okay. I really do want things to be okay. I don't want to run out of gas. And when I carry groceries to my house, I take one sack at a time out of the car instead of trying to carry 4 sacks and a gallon of milk at one time. Because I want things to be okay. I want things to go okay. And the program has made it possible for me to want that, for me to be motivated by that process. See. I drank because I wanted to be a mysterious, interesting, exciting person. I drank for those reasons. I drank because I wanted to be creative. I drank for those reasons. I drank because I wanted to feel okay. I wanted to have higher self-esteem. I drank for those reasons. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous has made it possible for me to be sober, and has made it possible for us all to be sober. And sober we are creative people. Sober we are mysterious, interesting, exciting people. And sober we really are the people who write the songs that make the young girls cry. Thank you all for having me up here tonight.